Howdy everyone, and welcome to this demonstrational video on both the use of a boom pole, some tips on how to be a good boom operator, and on slating and how to use a slate and what that would be used for. So first we'll dive into boom operation, which is obviously the primary microphone that would be used to capture dialogue on set. Very important part of the equation for capturing sound. One thing that I will say first and foremost is that you could have, of course, other microphones on set, most notably lavaliers, or you could have hidden mics. If you're in a car, you could have perhaps a cub mic that looks like a little cookie that you can hide in a car. I don't think we have any of them in our E-room, but they're definitely used in the industry. But by far and large, your boom microphone on the end of the pole here would be the most important microphone on set. It is the one microphone that should be capturing all of your actors and subjects' voice best, whether it's narrative or documentary. Always want to have a boom pole with a microphone on the end of it to capture that stuff. You never want to rely, for example, on lavaliers. Now a lavalier can of course come in handy when the shot is so damn wide the boom just can't get close, but that's the only scenario that I would say the lavaliers would then take precedence. I have seen a few films over my teaching career where students have, for some reason or another, decided that they didn't need a boom microphone and the sound came out like crap. A couple of times I had to ADR most of it because the lavaliers, though they're helpful, don't have that naturalistic sound that a shotgun or hypercardioid mic would have on the end of a pole. You get the actual sound of the space a little bit. We're more accustomed to hearing the voice in the theater that's recorded by and captured by a microphone on the end of the boom pole, whether it's a shotgun or a hypercardioid. So that's what we're used to, and that's what our ears are expecting. So great, well, let's talk about some tips that I have for booming then. So that's primarily what I want to dive into here. That's just a primer to get us started. But yeah, first and foremost, and I think that this is one that all of you should know by now, as I've talked about it in other videos, is you need to make sure that you point the mic at the actors, the subjects' mouths, at their faces. I can't tell you how many times I've seen an amateur, like I'll even be driving down the street in LA and someone's doing like some DIY guerrilla shoot or something like that. And the person has the boom pole up and it's just facing up and down, like directly at like the people's feet, in between like a few people speaking. You're not capturing their voice, you're capturing the ground. If people are shuffling their feet around, you're probably hearing their feet better. So what I usually do is even angle this a little bit so that when I have it like over here, it's actually pointing at somebody's mouth. So that's really, like the tactic that you want to have. You don't want to just have it straight up and down like this. That's not getting me at all, as we've seen in the previous mic use videos and stuff like that. That you need to have this thing pointed directly at the face, at the mouth. They don't call it a shotgun for nothing. It's like pointing a gun directly at your target. You point this mic directly at your targeted voice. So very, very important. A bit easier, of course, to handle if you're doing documentary, like I've mentioned. You could actually mount this microphone on a stand. I believe you can get from our E-room just a simple mic stand that you can point directly at someone's mouth and just leave it there. But, of course, on a narrative shoot, you have your actors moving around, so you have to move this thing and follow them as they're moving as best as you can. Great, so that's one giant, big first thing to have to tackle. The second one that I'd say was also the most important, I'll put these starred most important ones first, is keep the mic above, holding it correctly, holding the pole correctly. Yeah, so keep the mic from above and hold it correctly. Because, yeah, this is the other cardinal sin that I usually see on set. Not so much the mic above, because I think generally people understand that the boom mic goes this way and not down here, but I have seen this before. You know, boom operators might, that aren't used to doing it might get a little lazy, and they're like, well, this is getting it too. I'm just tired. Really, the only reason why you'd want to boom from below is if you had like a camera angle that is shooting up at the sky like this, like say a trunk shot or something like that, and you just can't get the boom out of the frame because it's, of course, just too wide of a shot into the sky. That's really the only acceptable way that you'd want to boom from below. Now, you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal? Well, there's a few deals. First off, I can get from out of the screen into my face. I'm just right off the screen here, and I just pull it down a little bit. Very, very close. I'm still only like about a foot away from my face. But think about booming below in this shot right here. I'd have to be way down here to get out of the frame. So especially on like a wider or a medium shot, you can get much closer to your subject's face from above than from below. Plus, when you point your mic up at the sky, if you're in an exterior, you can get a lot more noise going on just in the environment by pointing it upward. You're going to get any airplanes a lot louder, though usually you stop shooting when an airplane's going by. But you'll get traffic that's reverberating around a lot more in the sky than pointing it from above down to the ground. There's not a whole lot of sound being reflected and coming up from the ground. Hell of a lot more in the sky. And then secondly, I can hold this and move around quite easily from above. From below, you can't see it, but I got my computer desk here and like a bass amp over here. I'm gonna like start running into stuff and people if I start, going this way. So there's lots of things that I could run into from below if I'm moving around, obviously. So that's not gonna be helpful. I mean, the construction of the boom pole is as such so you can go over everything, so you can easily move around the whole entire room without running into things. So that's kind of an obvious one, hopefully, but yeah. But I think the second part of this, holding it correctly at the same time while you're booming above, is also the biggest cardinal sin that I've seen on DIY and student shots. I'll see students doing this for the first time. They're in a marching band or they're fishing. Now the problem with this is that this might feel comfortable here, but you're generally not at this level. I mean, maybe if you're in a close-up, like the shot is very, very close, I could do this because then I can just get right up close to my subject like this, but that's like really the only scenario where that's possible, is you're not even having to boom from above, you're just kind of holding the microphone and pointing it at the actors' mouths while you're in a close-up. So this is fine, like say in a very tight shot where I can just get really close and I can be just out of the frame as I'm shooting and trying to record their voice that way. But most of the time, that's not the situation. Most of the time, the shot's a little wider, and you don't have the luxury of being able to do that. So most of the time, you have to bring the boom pole all the way over the shot so it's out of the frame like this right now, and I can, kind of get out of the frame. And I'm not entering the frame. Well, I'm entering a little bit that way. But yeah, it's very easy for me to go above the frame when I'm holding it correctly, like I'm lifting weights. I'm raising the roof. So that's the more appropriate way to hold a boom pole, is this way. And this is actually quite a bit less exhausting to hold at this capacity. This is very easy compared to, like, say, doing this, especially if I start to have to lift it up more. This starts to feel real awkward. And this is gonna get real tiring real fast. All the weight is suddenly put on this hand right here, and this hand's not doing anything. I'm not, I mean, like I could just do this and all it does is make my, shoulder and my elbow feel tired because I'm awkwardly placing it. So yeah, most of the time you're going to be doing this. This is the correct way of holding a boom pole. And I can really extend this out a lot and still hold it just fine. The boom pole is very light, the microphone's very light, so it's going to be much easier to boom in that sort of capacity than trying to like do something like this. And that really feels awkward. So I can extend the boom poles out a lot more if I want to loosen it up, and even go longer if I would want to. And by the way, the way to tighten and loosen them, if you look on top, like clockwise and counterclockwise, clockwise being right, counterclockwise being left. Clockwise is, right being righty-tighty, left is lefty-loosey, counterclockwise. So try to remember that. A lot of students forget that and they go the wrong way a really long time. Like, why isn't it tightening? Well, it's because you've been going the wrong way for a really long time. In fact, when I grabbed this boom pole from the school and brought it out of the case just before I started recording this, I had to do that. There was one that was so loose I had to turn it for about 30 seconds before it started to tighten up because somebody had loosened it so much, not realizing they were going on the wrong direction. So when you look from the top, clockwise, right is tight. But yeah, make sure that you are holding it properly and correctly. It'll be much easier. I've done shots where I've had to, long shots, like 4-minute takes, where I've had to extend the boom pole all the way out because like characters are moving all over the place in a large room. And that's much easier to do than like trying to do some kind of awkward thing like this that you get real tired real fast. So yeah, palms of your hands, except for in the very rare circumstances where you might be able to do this in a close-up, but that's very rare. And I can even do this in a close-up and point it, and it still feels fine. So I'm of the opinion that I'd probably still do this because I'm just so used to this position right here. So yeah. Great. So first two big points to bring up on booming are those. Those are probably the most broken ones that I've seen and the ones that will ruin your recording, especially the first one. If you're not pointing the mic at someone's mouth, if you're not trying to get as close as possible, like about a foot or two away at the most, you're going to get a bad recording. And then secondly, if you're not holding it from above, you're going to get a bad recording. It's going to be too roomy. And if you're not holding it correctly, you're just going to get tired. Okay. Know which end of the mic is which. That's a pretty easy one. Which end is which? I mean, it's easy when I have it on this mount right here. And as a side note, I think it's good to orient what's going to be in the kits when you grab these things from the e-room. So the microphone comes with the kit for now, at least. I think when we get hypercardioids, it was mentioned that we'd have the microphones separate and you'd get whichever microphones you need along with the boom pole. But for now, the mic comes with the kit, comes with the boom pole, as well as the shock mount here. And it comes with a little handle that you can attach to the shock mount instead of the pole in case you're just going out to point the mic to record like, some wild audio, some sound effects, some clips for sound effects. And it also comes with this kind of more robust windscreen. Again, this is no substitute though for a Zeppelin. I'd say that, again, this is a very minimal windscreen that would help if it's just slightly windy outside, but if you know you're shooting outside, you gotta get a Zeppelin. I can't repeat that enough. So we've already looked at the Zeppelins, but essentially you would put the mic inside of the Zeppelin and screw it on the top of the pole. So you don't have to use this, this shock mount right here. So a lot of students are like, I've seen them for the first time, put the shock mount on here and they're like, what? How do I get the Zeppelin on now? Well, you don't use the shock mount. There's a shock mount in this that the boom pole goes inside of or the boom microphone goes inside of, as we already looked at. Also, as we're reviewing stuff that comes with the kits, Obviously, we already talked about how the dead cat or the sock comes with the Zeppelin for extra wind protection, but the Zeppelin also comes with a couple other things. This is useful if you have a longer mic, so it's like an extension. This mic will fit fine inside of the regular one though, but we do have a couple longer mics that I think we took out of student circulation but might be putting back in at some point, but that's what this would be for if you were using a longer mic to extend the size of the Zeppelin. And then lastly, it also comes with like a little tool to adjust, like a little screwdriver thing to adjust some things on the Zeppelin. I've never had to use it. I guess they just stick it in there because it came with the kit in the first place when they ordered it. And it comes with a little comb for the hair of the Zeppelin, I guess, in case it gets all matty and stuff like that. So it's like a little cat hair comb. Anyway, so that's just like to talk a side note on supplies that you get when you're getting boom pole stuff or Zeppelin stuff. Great, but yeah, like on that note, when you have the Zeppelin on, sometimes it's hard to tell which end is which. And you know, sometimes you have to go like check, 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 check to be able to tell what you're doing. A lot of times you can tell though because of, I mean, with this obviously you know which end is which, but a lot of times you can tell from the Zeppelin which end the XLR cable is coming from. That's the back end obviously. But yeah, on that note we do have, of course, would usually have a cable plugged in. Some boom poles, I think this one actually used to have this, yeah, because there's an XLR plug in the bottom. So once upon a time there was a cable that went through this pole and we just have to plug the cable in here and then plug another cable out to go from there. But those break down over time, and so now we don't have any of those, we just have poles and we just wrap the cable around the pole. And what I usually do is take some gaff tape to tape it in place, but I have the sticky side out so that you know, I make a tape loop with the sticky side going this way, and then I can move the loop up and down, because if I just taped it directly onto the pole, if I were to shorten the pole, you know, then I would get a big like loop suddenly coming out. So that it helps me adjust whether or not I need to move the pole's length up and down. So that's just a couple other good side notes too. But yeah, that might be an issue if you have the Zeppelin on, you forget which end is which. Might sound stupid, but I've totally seen it before. I've heard takes that were from a student film and been like, why does it sound the boom operator is like chilling out in the corner of the room like this? Well, it's because they had the mic pointed at the ceiling and not at their faces. Which, you know, you think the boom operator would be clued into what's going on, but who knows? I've had some students that I have no idea what they're thinking sometimes. Anyway, so hopefully you can all be competent in that. Great. So I'd also say some other good notes are be careful, because you're the only crew member as a boom operator with a giant stick. So you want to make sure that, you know, you're not just like, oh, hey, how's it going? Well, hey, what's going on over there? And then suddenly run into somebody. You don't want to leave it on the ground for someone to trip over. I usually like try to find a corner of a room or someplace where I can, you know, nicely lay it against the wall so it's not going to hurt anyone. So yeah, just be mindful that, you know, you have this giant pole that can run into stuff on set. So, you know, be careful. Watch where you swing the pole. Framing as well. I think that I could put a star next to this. I think this is an obvious one though. I think that these first two a lot of people forget about. Maybe not forgetting booming from above, but at least forgetting out how to hold it correctly and forgetting it to point at people's mouths. But this third one is very important, but I don't think people forget about this, which is to stay out of the frame. You obviously don't want the boom getting into the frame. That breaks the reality, or you have to redo the shot. You might have to crop it later if that was your only take. Maybe use some After Effects to get it out. But yeah, you've broken the reality, of course, when the boom enters the frame. So what I always recommend is know where your frame starts. You know, like pick point on the wall, like kind of visually, so that when you know that you've gone into the frame, you can communicate with the camera operator and say, hey, let me know when I'm in. And then it's like, oh, there you're in. Oh, okay. So I guess I can only be around that mark on the wall. You can kind of use like a guide on the wall or in the distance or a tree or something like that that will kind of help you judge how far down you can move the mic before you enter the frame. So know your frame. But also, another couple ways of entering the frame are with a shadow. So watch out for your shadows. Very much so, because a lot of times the cinematographer isn't paying attention to that stuff, or the director isn't paying attention. The shadow might be really, really light, kind of like my shadow right now. It looks very washed out and you can hardly see it. So same thing, a boom might cast that sort of shadow, so you should be very aware of whether or not the boom is casting a shadow or not. That's your responsibility. So watch out for shadows. A lot of times, of course, that has to do with where the lights are positioned. But really, there's almost no shoot that I've been on where I can't find a good spot. I might be on this side and I'm casting a shadow, but then I'm like, okay, what happens when I move over here? Oh, okay, now I'm not casting a shadow anymore. So find the space where your shadow is not being cast. So sometimes that's not the ideal place for you to be standing comfortably, but visually you have to, of course, take that into consideration. You don't want to cast a shadow. And then B, reflections. That's another one that people forget about. Mirrors, car windows, windows from buildings. A lot of times this is not just the boom operator that gets caught in these things. I've seen student films where suddenly a glass door opens and for a split second you see the entire crew in the reflection of the door as it's opening at a certain angle, and you're like, well, that broke the reality. So reflections is another thing to keep in mind too. Even sunglasses you should be mindful of. Like, check with the cinematographer, the camera operator, what's going on. So when in doubt, like that's the one thing that you should do as a boom operator to communicate with the rest of the crew. You really don't have to say anything except for asking who is ever operating the camera if you're in the shot, whether you're entering the shot, whether if there's a shadow or a reflection. So if you're not sure, the cinematographer will damn well be happy that you're checking. They won't be like, why are you talking to me? No, they're gonna be glad if you're like, am I causing a reflection? And they'll be like, oh yeah, you are, I didn't notice, thanks for checking. Because the cinematographer wants to get a good shot. They don't want you to ruin their shot, and sometimes they're not really cognizantly thinking about whether you are or not. Very super important. Let me think. So yeah, lastly, the only other point that I can really think of is just being cognizant of your own self as a boom operator, being polite, as I've said, but also making sure that you don't have like some physical things like jewelry. You don't want to clank on the pole. You want to make sure that you handle the pole, very carefully. Like you can go back and forth like this, sliding back and forth, but that's going to make sound that gets picked up by the mic. I only do like this or that if it's between when people are speaking. If you need to make an adjustment when there's no dialogue going on, that's okay, that can be edited out. But if you're doing this while someone's speaking, that's gonna get caught. So really know what you're going to do with the boom pole. If people are moving around within a scene, a lot of times there are rehearsals before a shot is actually taken. You can rehearse right along with the actors to know what you're going to do. That's good advice right there. So make sure that you are aware of the plan and don't make too much noise with the pole, with handling, with jewelry, with your own feet. You definitely want to wear the quietest shoes that you own and definitely soft shoe it. And make sure that you don't wear bright freaking clothes. You don't want to wear your your neon green shirt to set that day, because that can actually bounce off of you and onto the actors, because you're one of the closest members of the crew to the actors. You want to wear very muted clothes Like what I have on right now is pretty perfect. A black shirt, though that can be very hot. You probably don't want to wear a bright white shirt either, though white can be okay. Definitely better than like bright colors that can be reflective. So be aware of that too. So great. That really wraps up all the points on booming. But one other piece of technology that I hadn't mentioned yet that I should, that goes right along with booming, is the headphone amplifier. That's another key ingredient that a boom operator needs in order to do their job. A headphone amplifier allows you to take the XLR cable that comes from the boom, from the mic, you plug it in, it's usually something you clip onto your belt, and then it has an output to plug another XLR in to go to the recorder. You then have the ability to plug headphones in that device. Very, very important. You don't want to be a boom operator without a headphone amp. Because just like I said before, a boom operator without headphones is like a cinematographer with a blindfold on. You want to have, the ability to hear what it is you're capturing. So headphone amps are a vital ingredient. You need to have this little thing that you clip on. You can plug your boom in, and then you can adjust your own volume. Generally, they have the ability to adjust your headphone volume, but it doesn't do anything to the actual signal that's getting recorded. The signal that's getting recorded is untouched, and it goes off to be recorded by the sound mixer. What could also be beneficial is a wireless transmitter, so that exists pretty prevalently throughout the industry, that you wouldn't have a cable coming off the headphone amp to go to the recorder. You'd actually have, like, similar to this lavalier that I've pointed out before, a wireless transmitter, so that the boom operator is like free to move around wherever they want. They're not tethered by a cable. So that's pretty standard practice nowadays in the industry because there's the money for it. We don't have transmitters for our boom equipment quite yet, maybe in the future. But that's another cool thing that you might run into. One thing we also actually don't have yet at Cal State Long Beach are headphone amplifiers, in fact. But our excellent tech Rob has made these things called duplex cables. So that's a good note to remember. Maybe write that down. Duplex cables. And what those are is he's rigged these things up, and they're a cable that is basically doubly wrapped that carries an XLR and a headphone input and output. So basically what the sound mixer does is plug in the XLR parts to the input for the boom, and then plug in the headphones from a splitter, because the sound mixer wants to hear as well. I think the duplex cables come with a splitter, in fact. So they plug it in. One of the headphone cables runs to the boom operator, and the other headphone jack is right there for the sound mixer to plug in their area. But then the other end of the cable, the boom operator plugs in to the boom, and then there's a headphone jack for them to hear what they're doing. Now the problem with that is that the headphone level is still dictated by the sound mixer. So whatever level they want to adjust, boom operator is getting the same level. They can't independently adjust their own level. And then secondly, the sound mixer is usually listening to more than the boom. They're listening to some lavaliers and stuff too. So with this duplex cable that Rob made up, they have to listen to all the lavaliers too. So it's a little distracting because they can't exactly hear the only thing they need to be paying attention to, which is the boom. So there's this half measure that Robert made up, but just like the hypercardioids that I mentioned that are on the order list, there were also some headphone amplifiers that we were supposed to get this year. All of it is on hold because of the pandemic, but that's the situation. We will acquire those hypercardioids and headphone amps eventually, but the point is moot obviously right now because y'all can't get anything, which I really feel bad about. I'm laughing, but I'm like, what can we do? Everybody else that's going to film school right now is in the same situation, so is what it is. Anyway, that's boom operation. So now let's move on to Slate use. Great, so we've got clean slate here and a slate itself, got rid of the boom pole, and we're ready to talk about what this might be used for, which I'm sure a lot of you recognize from many behind the scenes videos. You might have even been on set already where one of these is in use. And so first and foremost, let's talk about what is its primary function. Obviously, I get a lot of answers when I ask what this is used for about, okay, yeah, we put the information about what's going on with the film on here, the producer, the director, the camera operator, what date it is, and then obviously the scene and the take, probably the most pertinent and useful information for each shot. But that's not its primary function. Its primary function is, of course, to use in order to sync audio with video in post. So when you clap this one single frame of spike in your audio, that can be used very easily to sync up that separately recorded piece of audio with the separately recorded piece of video in post-production before you start to edit. Now, this has primarily, of course, to do with double system shooting. You could use one of these in a single system shoot, but you really don't have to. You really just need one in order to sync separately recorded audio up. We haven't really dove deeply into double system recording yet, but we will in the coming couple of weeks. And this is the first ingredient to talk about really at the beginning. I think it's, that's why it's important to mention now. So, that's its primary function, and that's what you should always remember, is that this is to help you in the post-production process more than anything else. It's also good because, we do have those bits of info that we write upon the slate itself, but the fact we use it to sync things in post is the most beneficial aspect of it. And even in lieu of not having a slate, we can, for example, even simply use our hands. So I've been on sets where they're like, oh crap, we forgot to get a slate, and we can just simply do this in order to slate our audio just as easily. But it's, of course, nice to have one of these. You look more professional. You look even more professional if you get one of these that has time code synced into it. You can get basically like a very fancy version of this with numbers running at the top digitally. You might have seen these in some behind the scenes videos. And what those are doing basically is there's a little set of devices you can get that will encode a constantly running time code, stream of time code, so a string of numbers that are always running, and plug those into your slate, into your audio recorder, and into your camera so that all of them are recording this exact same time code simultaneously. And what that allows us to do is just sync all this stuff together in post without even having to use the slate itself. But the slate is still there, that one frame that happens when you clap the slate, to then use as a reference to sync your audio and your video together later, which we will be doing. We'll be going over exactly how this works, and you'll even have a little project around syncing stuff together. So we will put this into practice in the post world, even though you all can't, again, be doing this in person. So with that said, I think it's also then next good to talk about call order. When this is used and what happens before a take is shot. And some of you, I think, have a bit of an idea about this, but this is where that classic lights, camera, action, set of lines comes from, which we do not use anymore, and you'll see why here in a second. I'll come back to it. But let's talk about exactly what the proper call order would be nowadays. So, first off, there's always the call to be quiet. So you'll hear something like quiet on set, or maybe you'll hear someone say settle if it's a smaller crew of like maybe 5 people, a couple of actors, so you don't have to like yell on a megaphone to like dozens of people, quiet on set, you know. You just have to say, okay, is everyone ready? Is everyone settled? And usually that is done by the way, the call order, just to clarify, is done by the AD, the assistant director. Hopefully all of you know what that individual's tasks are, but in case you don't, the assistant director is the person that everyone hates on set, really. It's the person that's cracking the whip and making everyone do their job correctly, and they're like the boss on the film, but not really the boss of the film. They're just the person that's there keeping everyone in line for the most part. So yeah, good ADs usually are people that everyone else in the crew doesn't like that much. But they appreciate, let me put it that way. They want that person to be there because they don't want to be that person. But anyway, so the AD, they first, rally everyone together, make sure everyone's ready, quiet, and ready to go. Secondly, the first thing that's asked of the crew is that sound is rolled. Say, roll sound. And then what is said back by the sound mixer is usually rolling, or sometimes even speed. That's a common thing to say too. Both mean the same thing. Both means that we're recording and ready to go. That's really all you have to remember, is that speed means rolling. It comes from just a little tidbit, the fact that back in the day, when we recorded on tape and on film, it would actually take a second for the gears of the recorders, whether it be the film camera or the audio recorder, to get up to speed. It's not like you just hit record and it's ready to go. You have to wait like a second or two, and then you could say speed. Nowadays, there's a lot of recorders that can actually start recording even before you hit record. Like the Sound Devices recorders I love so much. You can set them so that they're kind of always constantly recording, but it's erasing itself at the same time. So once you hit record, you've already recorded 2 seconds. So it's like magic, but yeah, it's the opposite of getting up to speed almost. But we still use this term speed, and that's all you need to remember, is that you can use the term rolling or the term speed to indicate that you are rolling. So sound comes first, and that's because sound traditionally, and again, there's all these film conventions that we get from historical use. Again, speed comes from that, but also the fact that sound comes first is because sound traditionally, back in the analog days, was cheap. We would just be recording sound on tape, whereas film was recorded on celluloid, actual film stock, and you run a few seconds of that for no reason, and you're burning money. So that's why sound was always recorded first. But even though sound and picture are pretty much identical in cost nowadays, because it's all recorded as ones and zeros, we still record sound first. And sound actually does take up less space. So if you're running sound for longer than you are running picture, even slightly longer, then you are technically taking up less gigabytes. But yeah, that's the next one that we would say is roll sound. And then the DP or the camera operator would say the same thing, rolling or speed, same thing. Then what comes next? The slate. And generally for that, you would hear say marker or mark it. Either one works. And the assistant camera operator, usually second assistant camera operator, generally called the clapper, will be the person to get in front of the screen, say what's on the slate as far as the scene and the take is concerned, hit the slate, and then walk off so that we have that moment slated. Lastly, that's when we hit action. Great. There could be a few other little tidbits in here This is what's going to happen no matter what. But we could also have, like, say around here, we could have background action being said if you have a lot of background actors, you know, walking back and forth, or a crowd or something like that. We cue them like before everything else. We're just like, quiet on set. All right, background, do your thing. So then they're just actioning, and so that they don't have to be cued along with the rest of the actors. So the action is already kind of taking place around the main actors, so that when action is called, they can just jump in whenever they want. And then right here, before action, you might have, now this is not said by the AD, just like rolling or speed is not said by the AD. Of course, that's the other crew members letting them know that things are rolling. You might have the director of photography also needing to pause a minute and then say set right here. So the DP at this point might say set after the marker has been clapped, because they might have to readjust. They might be adjusting their focus on the slate, and then the assistant camera walks off, and then they have to refocus, readjust to where they need to be. Then they'll say set. So the director, sometimes it's the director that says action actually, but it could still be the assistant director that knows to call action after set. And that happens quite a bit actually, so that could be in there as well. But again, that's not said by the AD. All these things are said by the AD. Background action might be said by AD, but that's kind of a small side note. Great, if there's multiple cameras, you know, Slate has to be done in front of each camera. So if it's a multi-cam shoot, they would say camera A, camera B, camera C, do it for each one of them. What are some other conventions? Well, there might be an instance where you are not caught by the camera when you're slating. That's really important. You need to make sure that you're within the frame, like check, you know. Usually the DP will let you know. But if for some reason you clap it and you weren't in focus, or you were off frame a little bit, maybe you were like this, can't see it, then the DP will say, oh, we need that again, second sticks please. And usually the assistant camera operator should say and verbalize second sticks and do it a second time. And that helps because in post, the person sitting in front of the computer is listening to the audio file, and they see two spikes and they're like, which one do I use? And they listen to it and they make sure that the second one has second sticks before it, and they're like, oh, okay, that's the one I need to use. That's the one that's captured on the camera. So very important to verbalize this as well. Don't just go, oh, sorry, and then do it again, and then they're like, okay, I think that they'll probably figure it out, but it's a lot more helpful when you verbalize what's going on. You also might say, so yeah, these are some other things that the assistant camera might say while they're slating. There's second sticks. There's also soft sticks. So when you need to clap it softly. That might be the case when you have to get this right up into an actor's face. It's a very close-up shot, and you don't want to like smack that thing right in the actor's face, and like, you know, that's not fun. So generally when you have to get this close to someone's face, you want to say da-da-da-da-da, soft sticks. And then that way, in post, the editors know that they might be looking at the waveform and not see a big spike, and they're like, well, what's going on? And then they can listen to it and say, oh, it's soft sticks, there it is. So that helps. Because also, a really soft thing like this could also just sound like somebody's dropping something on set. So if you clarify what's going on before you do it, then the person syncing stuff in post will be like, oh, okay, I know that that is the slate and not something else random. So communication is very key. That's what this is all about, saying these things so you're communicating to whoever's in post weeks later about what it is that they're dealing with. Another important piece of communication is a tail slate. So maybe it's a very, very delicate scene, and the director does not want you to not have all this shouted out. They'll do it kind of whispery. They'll be like, okay, are you rolling? Are you rolling? Okay, everyone's going, okay, whenever you're ready, you can go. and then you don't slate at the beginning. But you got to slate at the end, so you still have a point to sync up. The editor still needs, or the assistant editor needs a point to sync things up in post. So that's when you verbalize at the end, tail slate. And this is another old school film convention. We flip it upside down and slate it like that. And you might be thinking, why? What's the point? Honestly, with digital files, there is no point, but we still do it as a film convention. That's how the industry works. The reason being is when you shoot, when we shot film on actual film, every take would be recorded on one giant long strip of film. You didn't have like separate files like we do nowadays when you stop and start a camera and stop and start an audio recorder. So every take would be on just that one big chunk of film. So what happens is, first and foremost in post, when they develop the film, someone will chop up the film strip so that each take is a separate strip. So they'll look for the slate, and wherever they see the slate in the frame, they're like, okay, I need to make a chop before that slate starts, and then that's the take. If they see this, then they know, oh, I got to make the chop afterward, because if they chopped off the slice of film, they're like, oh, yeah, I got to chop it off before. Well, now you've taken the slate off from the tail. So putting it upside down visually communicated to someone just by looking at the film strip, oh, I need to make the chop after the slate and not before. That's where it comes from, but we still hold it upside down if it's the end. Great, and then, yeah, one other piece of communication is if it's an MOS shot. Maybe a lot of you know what that means already. Basically, it just means there's no sound being recorded. So I think it even is, this could be, just hearsay, but I think it stands for mit-out sound, which is without sound in German, I guess. That's what I was told, but that's what we use to clarify that it is a silent shot. So if it's a silent shot, we still want to use the slate to communicate the shot's information. We just put our hand in between the slate and just hold it up. We don't verbalize because there's no audio being recorded. So we just put our hand in between, hold it up. We don't slam it on their hand, which I've seen some students do for some reason. They just hold it up for a second, take it away, and that at least visually shows you what the scene number and take number is. We don't have to clap it or say anything because no audio is being recorded, obviously. Great. Lastly, we should talk about how we write out the scenes and the takes. A lot of you, again, probably know this, but I find that a lot of students don't. They don't realize what the proper protocol is. The roll area, you don't need to worry about. That's back from when we actually use rolls of film. I mean, technically speaking, you could utilize it to say which card you're using. So the roll would be like what card you're utilizing. Not hugely important, honestly, because we just dump footage off the cards pretty soon after recording anyway, so the card that it was recorded on isn't necessarily that important. What is important is the scene and the take. So scenes, both are designated by numbers. So we could have scene 1, take 1, and that would be the master shot. Any master shot just starts with the number of the scene and however many takes. So hopefully you understand that the takes are however many times we shoot that same angle, one after the other, after the other, after the other. So if we have a scene taking place where it's a big wide opening shot where someone walks into the shot, we'd say scene 1, take 1, all right, and then we do it. Oh no, that wasn't good, let's do it again. That would be scene 1, take 2. Oh, you know what, we need a third time, scene 1, take 3. You get it. So every take is every single time they have to redo the same shot over and over. Once we move into doing other shots within that scene, say close-ups, mids, anything else, insert shots, we progressively add letters. So we go to scene 1A. So say that's like a close-up of the first actor, take 1. Oh, we need to get that close-up again, take scene 1A, take 2. Oh, we need to get the close-up again, scene 1, take 3. and so on. Okay, now let's do the close-up of the other actor. We will move to scene 1B now. So yeah, basically we add letters for every single sub-shot within the scene itself. When the scene is done, and we move on to, okay, now we're going to this next scene, which is outside. Now we're at scene 2, or whatever the scene is, because, you know, generally speaking, films are not shot the order in which they take place. Sometimes they are, but most of the time they're not. So we might go, okay, we're going to this other location. Now we're in scene 20, you know, so now we're going to this other location. Now we're in scene 15. And with each scene, with every shot within the scene, we add a letter. And every time we have to do that particular shot over and over and over again, that's the take. So we progressively give it a new take. So really good to remember that. Takes only have numbers. Scenes, maybe if you have a master shot, it only has the number. But every single other shot, you progressively add more and more letters for each shot. A lot of times this is all written out on a shot list too, so you know what shots you need to get. We already have them all written down, so you know that 1A is the first character's close-up, 1B is the second character's close-up, 1C is a two-shot, 1D is an insert of them picking up a piece of paper, etc. There are 2 letters we do not use. Hopefully it's obvious. I'm running out of room here again, but that is I and O. So don't use I or O. Why? Because I looks like a 1, could be confused for a 1. Is that take 1I or is that take 11? Well, it's take 11 because we don't use I. And then with O, it looks like a 0. So yeah, we do not use I or O because they can be confused for numbers. Great. Lastly, it's really good to understand when we change the take number when something goes wrong. So of course we change the take if like the take goes from start to finish and the director is like, okay, let's try to get another take. We progress to the next take. But what happens if you get all the way through one of these steps here and either the actor or the DP or somebody says, or even the sound recordist, as a sound mixer, you or boom operator, you can get through one of these steps and say, oh, I hear an airplane coming. Sometimes they'll just say hold for the airplane, or sometimes they'll say cut. But you, if you are a sound individual on set, have the authority to stop what's going on if you hear extraneous noise, because you'll hear it before anybody else. You'll hear a plane or a helicopter or something like that coming from far away before anyone else because of the nice microphones that you're hearing. Again, you're increasing your ear's frequency response and have like this superhuman hearing that no one else has. So very important, but once action starts, you can't just stop it. If like the actor's in the middle of a scene and suddenly an airplane stops going by, you can't say, oh, it's an airplane. No, the airplane is likely ruining the take, but everyone's gonna hear it and they know the drill. Any good filmmakers will be like, oh, damn, let's do it again because that was an airplane. So, but you yourself, you cannot stop the shot. But yeah, what happens in any of these steps if a shot is canceled before even the action starts? Well, there's a very, very definite line that happens to take place where once you reach that line, you got to go to the next take. That's when the scene is actually called off. Once this happens, then you've used the take. If you have someone verbally stepping in, visually and verbally coming in and saying scene 1, take 1, you have used take 1, even though right after that, the director says, oh no, wait, stop, or the actor's like, you know what, stop, I'm not ready. That take has been used because it's been slated as such. If it's before that, if you're quiet on set, roll sound, roll picture, oh, I wrote roll sounds twice, just realized that. Roll camera. Just to be clear, roll sound, roll camera, we don't say roll sound twice. If we reach that point and the marker hasn't been called, then we're good. We can still use the take, because it wasn't called. So if we're doing scene 1, take 1, and we get to quiet, roll sound, roll camera, oh wait, stop, we still haven't surpassed because we've just rolled footage for nothing. That's it. But once it's called, even if the actor hasn't done crap, nothing has happened, we've used it. And that's because, so in post, we don't have multiple audio files saying scene 1, take 1, or multiple slates saying scene 1, take 1. That, again, can confuse folks in post. They're like, well, which one goes with which? I mean, honestly, they can probably figure it out, but why add confusion to the mix? There's no point. So as soon as the scene and take has been called and it's been clapped, it has been used, no matter what happens after that. So good to point that out too. All right, great. So that is it for Slate use. Probably won't get your hands on one of these things until later on when it's physically possible for you to do so. But all really good information for you to know, even if you're not doing audio on set. This is all really good. I feel like whenever I give this demonstration, a lot of students are like, wow, I didn't know some of these things. So this is all good info to know. Obviously, a lot of times slates are not used on documentary. Generally, I think they're used a lot of times for interviews, but when you're getting B-roll and stuff, you're kind of shooting on the fly a lot of times, and you have to try to sync up your audio and video in other ways without the slate. Little difficult, but we'll go into that when we get to that point of our curriculum for the class. But for now, hopefully you enjoyed that and now feel more confident on going out there as a boom operator or going out there as an assistant camera operator, second assistant camera operator, to use the slate, or even as an AD knowing what is called. So great. That's it for that demonstration. More to come, but yeah, I hope you're excited to utilize these skills once you're able to.